We're still in conversation with the electricity minister here in studio, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. And in fact, as you can see on the side of your screen right now as well, we'll also have a funeral that we're streaming for you of football legend Stanley Screamer Shabalala. That funeral is still underway at Grace Bible Church. So there is, of course, lots of activity today, as it's quite a busy news day. But I'd like for us to start right there where COSATU, seems to say that we've seen the end of load shedding. We've closed the chapter. Have we closed the chapter?
Well, thanks, Bongiwe, and greetings to the viewers back at home. No, I've made the point on countless occasions that I'll be the first one to announce to the country that load shedding is behind us. We are making tremendous progress, far exceeding our own expectations in terms of our own projections. The ESCOM released the winter outlook, and that winter outlook suggested that if we keep the amount of losses to below 14,000 megawatts at any given time, then we are going to see a winter that is free of load shedding. I must say that as I speak to you, since the winter kicked in, we are significantly better than what our projections are. So we're averaging losses of about 12,000 megawatts. So we're 2,000 megawatts better than our own optimistic case. But remember, for me to make an absolute statement of the end of load shedding, we must get to a space where we create sufficient buffer to allow the South African economy to grow beyond the levels that have been projected of sub 1%. If you look at any of the reputable institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, National Treasury, they are putting it at below 1%. Our ambition is to get to a 1.5%, 2%, 3% over a period of time, hopefully during the course of the 7th administration.
So
we'll get closer to that. So it's not behind us, but we are doing exceedingly better than what we thought will be at this stage. It's
one thing to say we're doing better, right? And one can say we've seen not us as a country not having load shedding as significantly as we have in the past, but there are some areas that still face load reduction, and that for them is a reality. So for them it makes no difference to say that you don't have load shedding but you still have load reduction.
Absolutely correct. And I had cautioned in my previous responsibility as the head of investment and infrastructure in the presidency that our calculations suggest that the significant underinvestment by municipalities and ESCOM in the maintenance, preservance, and also replenishment of distribution infrastructure. And at the rate at which we are going, that is the levels of underinvestment, we are going to get to a situation where this infrastructure is unable to sustain the demand. And of course, that risk has materialized. So you're absolutely correct. It doesn't matter whether you call it load shedding, load reduction. The experiences of an average household is that there are hours in a day where they don't have electricity. So we need to make that investment in distribution infrastructure. We had a very healthy, productive conversation this morning with Salga on how best to resolve that. We'll engage with COGTA and come back to the country and say this is the solution that we've put together. The second area of concern is the exponential increase in the prices of electricity. I think over the past 7 to 10 years, it has increased by over 400%. Our salaries is not kept up with that. So it means that we are eroding the disposable income of households. The poor are disproportionately affected. So we're getting to a situation of what I refer to as energy poverty. By that I mean we're generating enough, but the households can't afford what is being generated at the current tariff structure. So one of the things that we're working on is a tariff plan, the electricity pricing plan. Remember that the cost of electricity is a function of the sources of generation. So if you rely on diesel to generate, expensive form of generation is going to reflect in the cost structure. So it's important that we migrate to cleaner, renewable sources of energy. I think there's technology that exists on that side that allows us an opportunity, especially for poor households, for them to benefit from these natural endowments. As I speak to you now, it's only the rich and affluent that have got that benefit. So that's something that we are working on. So those are the two fronts, the maintenance of the distribution infrastructure and the electricity pricing plan is going to be a focus of our work.
I'm going to get to the second part in just a moment. Let's stay with the first part, especially around municipalities, because it's all all well and good to work on these plans, but the administrators need to actually carry out these particular plans. If you have municipalities that owe Eskom billions of rands, and these are municipalities you are hoping are going to get to a point where they actually do maintain infrastructure, if they cannot pay their bills, how do they even get to the second conversation of maintaining infrastructure?
So I think we mustn't mischaracterize the problem. So essentially when we talk, we say municipalities are owing Eskom collectively 78 billion rands. But if you come to think of it, it's businesses, it's households, it's government that is owing the municipality. The number that has not been brought to the public attention is that municipalities collectively are owed 347 billion rands. So what is the point I'm making is that there's a systematic and structural problem. So it has to do with the performance of the South African economy. So there's a correlation. There's more and more people out of employment. So those people don't have an income to be able to service, if you like, the cost of utilities. But to survive, to live a decent life, you need water, you need electricity. And yet the expectation is that municipalities must provide, even if people objectively are not in a position to pay, then Eskom provides that. Of course, they bill and then people can't pay. And then we have another category of people that I refer to as delinquents. So it could be you and I, we can afford to pay, but we choose not to pay because we're sitting behind the poor and we're part of the same rhetoric. So it's important that municipalities are able to claim on those. And then the third category is what I call non-technical losses. So these are people in township lingo, they say izinyoka, so illegally connecting. And we know that in some instances, is the technicians, the few of them in Eskom, in municipalities that are assisting in this kind of practice. And we can see Eskom is clamping down on that, municipalities are doing that. And I must say that the great proportion of the employees at Eskom and municipalities honest, decent, and they really want to help us to solve this problem. So I'm just saying that the problem is complex. That's the point I'm making. And that's why we need that conversation with the municipalities. I don't think that the idea of just raining down on municipalities, condemning them, incompetent, that is particularly unhelpful. Of course, there are areas of subjective weaknesses. It has to do with corruption, the hemorrhaging of skill, the underfunding of municipalities. But fundamentally, the problem is the performance of the South African economy. There are people out of employment. They have to drink water. They need electricity to survive. So that's a conversation we're having with Salga. And we'll come back and say this is how we'll resolve it.
And I'm hopeful that you'll come back and actually give us an update on that, because when you look at that court judgment recently, for example, it speaks about some of the costing plans that these municipalities would not have submitted, and NERS are still granting them an increase, and that's being reversed. But you also then speak about another complex issue. But before I let you go, you've faced criticism, I'm sure you've seen it, around the nuclear plans. Others are saying that you are looking at a likelihood of 10 to 15 years to build. You're looking at exponential costs. They're taking it back to the past to say that in some instances the tender processes were concealed and all of that. So how then do you begin to speak to those who are saying don't look at nuclear right now, allow Quebec, but instead focus on everything else but that, given the costs that might rise?
Part of the reason why we are where we are at now is lack of planning. So just doing projection of what will be the demand in the future. The South African population is going to grow, and there's going to be more and more demand placed on electricity generation. The South African economy is going to grow, and if we want it to grow exponentially, if we want to broaden the revenue base, it relies on the availability of base load, the energy that is available all the time. What do we know about nuclear? So it's true that the upfront capital cost can be prohibitive, but what they don't tell you is that the operational cost, and here you just draw on Quebec, don't look at other parts of the world, is the cheapest, the cleanest, and the most efficient form of electricity. What's the point I'm making? Is that we're looking at the totality of the mix. So it's important that we draw from renewable. It's important that we draw from coal, and of course ensure that it is clean, and nuclear we know is part of the mix going forward. So let's not enter into a binary conversation, because in some instances really it's lobby groups. We don't want that form of generation. All we want is we are going to do everything for the interest of the sovereign and to ensure that we bring down the cost of generation. I did say that the procurement framework will come out. I've said openly, every step of the way is going to be very transparent so that we know what we get ourselves into, but we'll protect the interest of the country.
I know I'm competing with a lot of people for your attention, so thank you so much for stopping by. I'm going to let you go so you make sure there's no load shedding tonight. But at the same time, I'm holding you to coming back to ensure that you give us that feedback after your meeting with Salga and Kokta, because it's going to be critical to see what the plan becomes. As you say, it's a complex problem, especially with municipalities. You've seen what has been happening, but that is Electricity Minister there, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa.